When a Hollywood icon walks onto a late-night stage, respect should follow like a shadow. But what happens when the host decides to turn admiration into ammunition? That's exactly what unfolded when Sylvester Stallone stepped into Jimmy Kimmel's studio and found himself in the middle of a verbal showdown. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think really caused Sylvester Stallone to completely lose it on live television. The night started like any other talk show taping. Glowing lights, a buzzing crowd, and the house band playing a slick tune as Jimmy strutted in with his trademark grin. "Tonight," he said brightly, "we have a very special guest, the man who turned mumbling into an art form, Rocky himself, Sylvester Stallone." Thunderous applause filled the studio as Stallone walked out. Even after decades in the spotlight, his presence was magnetic. Dressed in a crisp black blazer and a deep maroon shirt, he waved to the audience and took his seat beside Jimmy, offering a polite, measured smile. "It's good to be here," Stallone said, voice gravelly, calm. Jimmy leaned forward, smirking. "Good to have you, Sly. I was told you'd be bringing wisdom, experience, a few unintelligible syllables, and maybe a protein shake." The audience laughed, politely. Stallone chuckled too, but his eyes, sharp and unreadable, told a different story. "I left the protein shake backstage," he said. "Didn't want to outshine your green juice." Jimmy grinned. "Touché. So tell me, another action movie, or did you finally make one with a plot this time?" A few laughs echoed. Stallone's face stayed composed. "It's a story about redemption," he said evenly, "about a veteran facing the ghosts of his past. It speaks to real pain." Jimmy raised his brows with mock awe. "Deep. And here I thought it was just another excuse to flex those biceps." The crowd giggled. Stallone didn't. "Sometimes pain needs muscle," he replied softly. "Not to show off, but to carry the weight." The air shifted. Subtle. Heavy. Jimmy tilted his head, amused. "Wow, that's poetic. Did Rambo teach you that? Or was it Rocky?" Stallone leaned back slightly. "Funny," he said. "I always thought comedy should punch up, not down." The audience reacted. A ripple of gasps and whispers. Jimmy blinked, caught off guard. "Hey, just having fun," he said quickly. "Don't want to get body slammed on live TV." Stallone smirked faintly. "Don't worry, I only hit when it's scripted." The laughter this time was nervous. Something had changed. What began as playful banter was turning into a sparring match, and Stallone was done playing defense. Jimmy, trying to steer back to safety, said, "Let's talk about your first Rocky. You wrote it in 3 days, right? Did you just run out of crayons?" A low murmur spread through the room, the kind that comes right before a storm. Stallone paused. "I wrote it with everything I had," he said quietly, "while sleeping in a bus terminal, trying to sell my dog to eat. So yeah, crayons weren't really the priority." The studio went silent. Jimmy shifted in his seat. Stallone leaned forward slightly, his tone steady. "You know, Jimmy, sometimes you crack jokes, sometimes you crack dignity. Be careful which one you're breaking tonight." It was like a bell had rung, gloves off. The audience was glued to the moment. No laughter now, just anticipation. What they were watching wasn't comedy anymore. It was confrontation. Jimmy forced a grin. "You know, Sly, you'd be great at stand-up. That comeback was almost intelligible." Stallone's stare didn't waver. "And you should try sincerity sometime," he said. "Might shock your audience." The crowd gasped, a collective "ooh" that hung in the air. Jimmy smiled tightly, but his eyes flickered with irritation. "Let's be honest," Jimmy said, pushing back. "You've made more sequels than Hollywood has ideas. Ever thought about just letting it go?" Stallone crossed one leg over the other slowly, controlled. "I keep telling stories people still want to hear," he said. "Maybe that's what really bothers you." Jimmy chuckled, but it sounded forced. "Or maybe it's that you keep playing the same guy, just with a new haircut." Stallone didn't blink. "Better than being a new haircut with the same jokes." The audience exploded with laughter and applause. Jimmy smiled stiffly, but the tension on his face was undeniable. Okay, he said, half laughing. "Touché. But seriously, aren't you worried people just see you as a punchline now?" Stallone leaned in. "Only when hosts like you try to write the jokes." You could almost hear hearts pounding in the studio. "Rocky wasn't just a movie," Stallone continued. "It was hope, for people who had none." Applause thundered through the room. Not just polite clapping, but genuine admiration. Jimmy tried to mask his unease with a grin. "But you're a millionaire now, right? Talking about struggle seems a bit rich." Stallone's voice dropped lower, deeper. "Struggle doesn't vanish with money. It leaves scars. It reminds you who you were and who's trying to use you for a laugh." Jimmy faltered for a second. "You think I'm using you?" Stallone met his eyes. "You tell me." The crowd froze. The silence stretched. For the first time, Jimmy Kimmel didn't have a comeback. Then he laughed, a touch too loudly. "Well, I didn't realize we booked a philosophy major tonight." Stallone smiled thinly. "Funny, I thought we booked a host." The audience roared again, louder this time. Jimmy's jaw tightened. He was losing control, and he knew it. Jimmy leaned forward, searching for a new angle, trying to regain control of the moment. "So tell me, Sly," he said with a forced smile, "how do you respond to critics who say your career is basically nostalgia now? That without the past, you're not much in the present?" Stallone didn't hesitate. "Critics talk," he said coolly. "Legends work. I don't relive the past, or I built it." The words hit like a punch. For a moment, there was only silence, and then a wave of applause crashed through the room. It wasn't just polite, it was passionate. Jimmy's grin tightened. He leaned forward again, desperate to claw back the spotlight. "Come on, Sly, can't you take a joke?" Stallone's smile faded. "Can you take the truth?" The air froze. The crowd went still. It wasn't tension anymore. It was electricity. Jimmy looked into the camera, his grin cracking slightly. "We'll be right back after this short break," he said with a shaky laugh. "If Stallone doesn't punch me first." But everyone watching, both in the audience and at home, knew that this wasn't just a short break. Something real had just happened, something that couldn't be edited out or softened by commercials. Because when words start cutting deeper than expected, even the toughest men can feel the heat. But Stallone, he didn't flinch. He was the storm. When the show returned, the lights snapped back on. Jimmy straightened his suit, forcing confidence back into his smile. "We're back," he said, with the one and only Sylvester Stallone. Voice therapy, the man, the myth, what is it now, 80-something-year-old action figure? The crowd laughed, but this time it wasn't laughter that filled the room. It was discomfort. Stallone smiled calmly. "Better to be carved in stone, Jimmy," he said, "than molded out of plastic." The audience erupted again, louder, sharper, alive. Jimmy tried to keep his composure. "Well, your fans are loyal," he said, chuckling. "Almost aggressively so. Like they still think you're that scrappy underdog from Philly." "I am," Stallone said simply. "I just wear better shoes now." Jimmy blinked. "Come on, Sly. Haven't we moved past the whole underdog thing? Isn't it time to hang up the gloves, literally and metaphorically?" Stallone stared straight at him. "You ever tell a soldier to hang up his boots because the war makes you uncomfortable?" The air grew heavy again. Not silence, but wait. Jimmy tried to play it off. "I don't think making Rocky IX counts as war." Stallone's tone turned steel cold. "It does when you're fighting cynicism, apathy, and the idea that people like me can't still inspire." Applause thundered again. The studio had shifted, and everyone could feel it. Stallone's voice carried not volume, but gravity. Jimmy forced a chuckle. "So what you're saying is, it's not ego. It's mission?" "No," Stallone replied. "It's responsibility. To remind people that you don't stop because the world tells you to. You stop when you decide you're done." Jimmy nodded slowly, pretending to admire the sentiment. Then, with a smirk, "Spoken like a man trying to sell another box office ticket." The crowd booed softly, a low murmur of disapproval. Stallone didn't react immediately. Then he said quietly, "You keep trying to turn this into a punchline, Jimmy. Maybe because deep down, you're afraid someone might take me seriously." The reaction was instant. The audience gasped and then roared. Jimmy leaned back, visibly rattled. He took a breath, pretending to stay calm. "You want to know what scares me, Sly?" he said, his voice forced steady. "It's that people think your on-screen persona is who you really are, that Rocky is real." Stallone leaned forward, voice low but piercing. "Rocky is real, not because I played him, but because millions of people saw themselves in him. He's a mirror, Jimmy, something you clearly avoid looking into. The room went still again, not awkward, but charged. It was like every eye was watching history happen. There's a line between teasing and disrespect, and Jimmy had just crossed it. Even the camera crew held their breath. The tension was alive, pulsing through every frame. Jimmy laughed nervously, fiddling with his cue cards. "So, Sly," he said, "what's next? A line of anti-aging supplements, maybe a reality show, keeping up with the comebacks?" A few chuckles came from the audience, weak, unsure. They weren't laughing with him anymore. Stallone took a deep breath. "You know what's funny, Jimmy? You sit there, hiding behind that desk and those jokes like they're armor. But at some point, the humor stops being clever and starts sounding like noise." Jimmy gave a strained smile. "It's just TV, man. You know how it is." "Maybe that's the problem," Stallone said quietly. "You treat everything like a punchline, even the people who came here with something worth saying." The audience was silent again. This time, it wasn't tension. It was respect. Jimmy tried to laugh it off. "Come on, don't be so sensitive. You've taken real punches. You can handle a few words." Stallone stood up, calm, steady, deliberate. The audience gasped. "I've taken enough," he said, "and I've given enough to this industry, to the audience, to what real storytelling means." Jimmy quickly stood too, trying to regain control. "Hey, where are you going? We're not done here." Stallone turned toward the audience. "But I am." The crowd erupted, this time not out of shock, but out of unity. Applause filled the studio like thunder. Jimmy tried to laugh. "Don't worry, folks. Next week we'll have someone with a sense of humor." Stallone paused at the edge of the stage. His voice was calm, powerful. "Next week, try having someone with a soul." The audience went wild. Stallone began walking toward the curtain, but just before he disappeared backstage, he paused. The lights caught his face, years of battles, comebacks, and quiet dignity etched into every line. He turned back toward the stage, his gaze steady and sharp. "You know," he said slowly, his voice carrying through the silence, "I've spent a lifetime creating characters who fight for something. Maybe it's time late-night television did the same." The audience erupted. The applause wasn't just loud, it was thunderous. Jimmy Kimmel stood frozen, half smiling, unsure if the show was even still his. The camera tried to follow Stallone, but the image glitched awkwardly, cutting back to Jimmy, blinking under the blinding lights. Well, Jimmy stammered, forcing a laugh. "That was, Sylvester Stallone, everybody." His voice trembled between comedy and damage control, but the moment had already escaped him. The truth had landed. Backstage, chaos met calm. Crew members stood silent as Stallone passed by. A few clapped quietly. One intern whispered, "Thank you." He nodded once. No ego, just gravity. Then the real storm began. Within minutes, the internet ignited. Twitter, TikTok, and every corner of social media exploded. Hashtags like "Bush Respect Stallone," "Late Night Showdown," and "Jimmy Went Too Far" trended worldwide. Clips of the exchange spread like wildfire, Stallone's calm defiance versus Jimmy's forced laughter. Memes flooded every feed, a still shot of Stallone standing tall, the caption reading, "Strength isn't loud, it's dignified." The next morning, headlines screamed across the internet. Stallone walks out in style. Late night turns, late fight. Hollywood legend schools talk show, host live. News anchors replayed the moment frame by frame, dissecting every line. Commentators debated who went too far, who crossed the line, who won. But one thing was certain, nobody could look away. Even celebrities weighed in, directors, actors, athletes. Voices from every corner of Hollywood came out in support. Some called it the most powerful interview walkout ever. Others said it was the moment late night lost its cool. And through it all, Stallone said nothing. He didn't tweet, he didn't explain, he didn't need to. His silence spoke louder than any press release could, because what the world had seen that night wasn't a meltdown, it was a man reclaiming his dignity. For decades, Sylvester Stallone had fought on screen. That night, he fought without throwing a single punch. He didn't storm out. He walked out, calm, unshaken, unstoppable. And the world, both in that studio and across millions of screens, knew they had just witnessed something rare, something real. This wasn't just another talk show segment, it was a battle line between respect and ridicule, and Stallone had drawn it with grace. The story would live on in clips, memes, and think pieces. But for those who watched it live, one truth burned brightest. Legends don't shout to be heard. They let the silence do the talking.